Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. Take a good look at these figurines. Can you identify them? Here's a little baby Brontosaurus over here, and a tiny T-Rex over there. They're dinosaurs. What if I told you that they were over 1,000 years old? Well, you'd think I was nuts. Because they're white, they look brand new. And that's because, of course, they are. They're just toys. But if I buried them underground for a few months, and then I invited you to watch me dig on my archaeological excavation, and I produced them, would you buy that? Would you buy they were over 1,000 years old because you saw them come up out of the ground? Now, maybe not these, but what about these? Is this a dinosaur? Maybe Dimetrodon? How about this one? Are we looking at a Brontosaurus here? These are examples of clay figurines from a place called Acámbaro in Mexico. Some people think that they're proof that dinosaurs and humans coexisted. After all, people had to make those figurines. But are they really proof of that? Let's take a closer look. The Acámbaro figurines first came to public attention in the 1950s. American and Mexican press began reporting about a large collection of strange ancient figurines. The story was that Waldemar Julsrud, a German shopkeeper living in Acámbaro, had purchased tens of thousands of figurines from local excavators. In fact, he had more than 33,000 of them. They were supposedly made by an unknown ancient culture. Now, several clues already point to the fact that suspicion is probably warranted here. First, nobody had ever seen or heard of any of these things until the 1950s. Second, 33,000 of them, that's a huge number. And then third, local excavators, what exactly does that mean? Now, professional Mexican archaeologists immediately called these figurines fakes. Pop archaeology and anomalous magazines, though, ran with the story. Magazines like Fate magazine. But there were also major US papers that picked up the story as well. And the rest, as they say, is history. Alternative history researchers said that the official archaeological community rejected the finds because the finds portrayed a contrarian portrait of ancient history. So we have truth by anomaly. They argued that no fossil remains from Acámbaro were ever found. No professional paleontologist or archaeologist had ever found like real dinosaur bones, and so the current residents, which were mostly peasants, would not know how to fake these. They wouldn't have known what a dinosaur looked like. They also argued there were just too many of them. You need lots of people in on this. The whole village had to be involved because of the sheer numbers. Well, what are we to do? How are we to evaluate all this? Well, let's continue. Has anyone really taken a serious investigative interest in the Acámbaro figurines? Well, they have. According to Alex Pizzotti, an archivist at the University of Pennsylvania who wrote in an article about the figurines, he says, in 1952, Charles DePazo, an archaeologist affiliated with the Amerind Foundation in Arizona, visited Acámbaro, studied Julsrud's collection, and observed two excavators at work. He concluded that the figurines were indeed fakes, unquote. Now, there were several reasons why Pizzotti thought that the figurines had been faked, and let me summarize those for you. He observed that the surfaces of the figurines that were pulled from the ground out of the dig displayed no signs of age at all. For example, there was no dirt packed into their crevices. Although some figurines were broken in places, no pieces of any figurine were missing. The odds of that happening are astronomical. The excavation's stratigraphy showed that the artifacts were placed in a recently dug hole filled with a mixture of surrounding archaeological layers. DePazo also learned that a local family had been making and selling these figurines to Julsrud for $1 a piece since 1944. Their appearance and shapes were presumably inspired by films shown at Acambaro's cinema or locally available comic books and newspapers. And of course, people had access to Mexico City's Museo Nacional. So even though there were no dinosaur bones ever excavated from Acambaro or nearby, the people who were creating these figurines had access to certain items, again, comic books, films, and whatnot, that could have inspired what they did create. Now, DePazo's research was not the only effort that went into evaluating these figurines. In 1955 and 1956, Linton Satterthwaite, curator of the American section of the Museo Nacional, exhibited a collection of comic books from the 1940s that showed striking visual similarities to several of the Acambaro figures. Now, his effort in doing this was intentional. He was trying to establish a means by which the peasants could create the models. What was their inspiration? And these comic books served as a really useful reference point. Now, between 1969 and 1972, the museum's Applied Science Center for Archaeology, abbreviated MASCA, tried to date some of the figurines using thermoluminescence, or TL, dating. Now, the years here, 1969 through 1972, thermoluminescence as a dating method was in its infancy then, and the results, believe it or not, produced a date for the figurines around 2500 BC. But DePazo had witnessed them being created. They knew this was not the correct date. What they did later on was reevaluate this testing, and in 1978, when thermoluminescence as a dating method had been refined, they redid the testing and reevaluated everything. Now, Pizzato summarizes this subsequent effort. He wrote, "It became clear that the TL technique employed in MASCA was unable to read the artifact's true thermoluminescence. Instead, artificially old dates were seemingly being produced by calculating the figurine's chemiluminescence, a different phenomenon which cannot be used for dating. As a result, serious doubts were raised about the accuracy of the earlier dates." So where does this leave us? There's really no good reason to conclude the Acambaro figurines are in fact ancient. The most recent thermoluminescent dating has them being much more recent than the first round, and every point of their production can be accounted for. They don't bear marks of any ancient specimens that you would normally dig up, such as missing pieces or obvious signs of age. Unfortunately then, these figurines are not evidence of either dinosaurs and humans being contemporaries or dinosaur survival. The latter is the domain of cryptozoology, which we'll no doubt get into on future episodes. Thanks for watching this episode of Fringe Pop 321. Please visit our website for articles and source materials on this topic and other topics, and please keep watching, because what you know may not be so.